We're now going to turn our attention, and Ann Turnbull will be our next speaker. Ann is the co-founder, co-director, and distinguished professor of the Beach Center on Disabilities at the University of Kansas. The Beach Center is described as a vital hub of national and international research and development on contemporary issues impacting the quality of life for individuals with disabilities and their families. Like Kirk and Gallagher, Ann and Rudd Turnbull spent some time in Illinois early in their careers. And similar to Sam and Jim, they have spent considerable time in the nation's capital supporting legislative changes for individuals with disabilities. They are both prolific authors who have impacted the field through publications, including the textbook that we use in our University of Illinois class on families. Ann and Rudd have won almost every award conceivable for their efforts in special education. In addition to their professional credentials, Ann and Rudd are the parents of 3 children, one of whom, Jay, was an adult son with multiple disabilities, who had what Ann describes as an enviable life in terms of his inclusion, productivity, and contributions to his family, friends, and community. Please join me in welcoming Ann Turnbull to the podium. She'll share her thoughts about family-professional partnerships.
Thank you, Mickey. It is such a privilege to be here. When Susan Fowler emailed and asked us, we immediately said yes. Susan and the Turnbulls go way back, and she is a dear friend and very respected colleague. Don't ever ask us to walk through fire, Susan, because we might do it if you ask. But we're so happy to be here. And when I knew the Gallaghers were going to be here, it just took my breath. I moved to the University of North Carolina in 1973. My vita was 1 page, and that included my name and address and phone number and my degrees. No publications, no presentations. I was so lucky to get that job. And when I was in the first meeting with Jim Gallagher, I remember my heart was pounding, and I thought, what am I doing here? I don't deserve this. And I have to earn my way to the respect of this powerful leader in our field. I felt when I was in his presence that I was possibly going to have a chance to make a contribution just being in the same room with him, but that I had to earn every bit of it. Just being in his presence gave me a sense of self-efficacy that I think very much propelled my career. He was so instrumental to both Rudd and myself. We left Chapel Hill in 1980, moved to University of Kansas, and every Christmas for 34 years, Jim wrote us a note about how sad he was the day we left. And we always felt so badly. Now we are retiring to Chapel Hill. I think Jim's spirit is part of this. And when we first started planning this, we were so excited about having him and Ronnie over for dinner and being able to absolve ourselves of the guilt of 34 years of disappointing our respected mentor and friend. So it is with tremendous pleasure and great humility with the Gallagher family here that I really dedicate my comments to the lineage that I had with Sam Kirk, which was through and mediated by Jim Gallagher. Well, in beginning, and let's see, in the late 60s, I was an undergraduate student at the University of Georgia, and this was my first textbook in a methods course written by Dr. Gallagher 47 years ago. It just reminds me of how many times I have had to have my hair dyed over these last years, thinking 47 years ago when I had cut my teeth on Dr. Kirk's book. Then, how many of you have seen this book? Do people remember this book? This is a great book. It has the Hall of Fame people, the wave makers that Paul talked about, a chapter by each one of them in terms of their personal reflections. There was a chapter by Sam Kirk, and in that chapter, this is his picture. Now look at that sports jacket and tie. That must have been the fashion statement of the times. There was also a chapter by Jim Gallagher, and Red, come get this and give it to the Gallagher family. I copied this for you to take. I didn't know whether you had this in your family archive, and I wanted to share it with you. You see underlinings that Red and I have done in that chapter. This is a very wonderful book of the early giants of the field, and it was published about early 80s. So it has many, many insights, and I recommend it to you. Well, it's interesting, and it just made me feel the connection with Jim Gallagher, that in his talk that Ryan gave, he used the same quote that I chose from Dr. Kirk. And I really love that convergence. And this quote, you can read it here. It has been a source of satisfaction to participate and help the parent movements, first for children with cerebral palsy, then for the mentally retarded, and lastly for the learning disabled. I found a satisfaction in associating with many intelligent and knowledgeable parents in these organizations. If I were to give credit to one group in this country for the advancements that have been made in the education of exceptional children, I would place the parent organizations and the parent movement in the forefront as the leading force. I want to build on that in interpreting the past with a few comments and then projecting the future in terms of the roles of families. And I do this from two different worlds of living in the parent world as the parent of Jay Turnbull. Red and I always say Jay was our greatest professor, but the only problem was that he would always give us the final exam before we had the course. Because he kept taking us to greater and greater levels of learning due to the complexity of his support needs. But also living in the world of special educators and academics and being a researcher, I want to interpret the parent movement with an emphasis on parents being part of the solution and not part of the problem. The parent movement, around the time that Dr. Kirk was building up his momentum in the professional world, the first parent organization for children with intellectual disabilities was in the early 30s. At a meeting of the American Association on what was then called mental deficiency, thankfully our language has changed over the years, a group of parents met. And they decided to get parents from all across the country, parents of children with intellectual disability who didn't know what was happening in other places, but they knew that they must band together to start education for their children. In one of the historical documents from 1950, one of the quotes was from one of the parents saying, "Imagine it. Practically every parent there thought his group was the pioneer. Most of us were strangers to each other, suspicious of everyone's motives and jealous of their progress." At that meeting, the then governor of Minnesota, Luther Youngdahl, ended a speech to these parents saying, "Our great democracy can be measured by what it does for the least of the little citizens." And as the story was told, the meeting hall was really transformed into a cathedral with misty-eyed parents thinking that if they came together and had collective power and worked with a professional leader such as Dr. Kirk, that true change could happen. Shortly after that, the President's Committee on what is now called Intellectual Disability was formed, and interestingly, it was another family member, President Kennedy, as the sister of a person with an intellectual disability, started this committee and asked his sister, Eunice Shriver, to head it up. So families had a major role from the outset. And a family leader, the dean was saying earlier about standing on the shoulders of giants. And Rudd and I always think we're standing on the shoulders of Elizabeth Boggs, the first and only parent member on that President's Committee. Elizabeth had a PhD from Oxford University in mathematical chemistry. She was the first female faculty member at Princeton. And she resigned her job as a young assistant professor to spend the rest of her life as a volunteer advocate for individuals with intellectual disability. Elizabeth co-authored, imagine being the only parent member on this distinguished national committee and being the co-author of the report that helped build the foundation for many, many pieces of our national legislation and of our national systems for supporting individuals with developmental disabilities. Elizabeth wrote something that always inspires me, and that is that in her whole career, she died from a car accident in her early 80s, but over decades of her career, she never felt that her son benefited from her advocacy efforts. And that was because her son David had very profound intellectual disability. And I think still today, in so many of our trends, so much of what we do is aim more for people with mild and moderate support needs. And still, so many people with significant intensive support needs are still not getting those needs met. And I always feel a commitment to Elizabeth to speak for that group. Well, there were many other milestones for parents in being early advocates for court cases, for what led to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and what over time, in concert with the SAMs and the GIMs of the professional world, a whole new era was produced of opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Well, let's look from IDEA and this commitment to partnership. I'm not familiar with the jumping the shark connotation, but I'm thinking that we declined. So, and let me point something out about that. In an article that one of our students at the Beach Center did as her master's thesis, she interviewed a number of professionals across different disciplines about ideal parents with whom they had worked. For them, what was an ideal parent partnership? This article came up in our qualitative interpretation of the Goldilocks principle. And I want to tell you about the Goldilocks principle. These professionals talked a lot about parents who had too little involvement. And this was mainly, they would zero in that these parents did not follow their instructions of what they should be doing with their child at home. I try to touch base with the parent at least once a month and let them know what we're working on and sending homework home. And I think that is important that the families first be able to read what I want them to do and have the time to sit down and actually do that with the kid. A very pervasive theme in our research of the parents were not following the teacher's instructions, too little involvement. Then we had the parents with too much involvement. Parents who made suggestions for academic and behavioral strategies, Rudd Turnbull, you ought to be ashamed. You did that. Parents who would question some of the decisions that teachers made. Listen to this quote. Do you think there is such thing as being too involved? That was asked by the researcher. Yes, definitely, I do. I think some parents won't trust the teacher, so they'll want to be involved for everything, every decision. I think it's great when families are very involved as long as they're not totally running the show. And I have seen that happen where they try to do that and it doesn't work. They become a big pain. Susan, that might have been said about you. It's a subtle message that maybe you're not competent enough if somebody wants to be a true partner. I was visiting with a parent at CEC who's also a professional in the field, and she was telling me about some of her recent experiences with the teacher of her daughter who had a disability. And she said that one teacher said to her, I resent that you use insider knowledge to get services for your daughter that most parents don't even know about. I resent that you use insider knowledge, and we're supposed to be partners, and we're supposed to make joint decisions. So, what teachers told us, what the professionals, it wasn't just teachers. In this study, there was social workers and counselors and psychologists and nurses, but their comments focused on the fact that parents should be assisting educators in doing what they think is best, rather than contributing to the decision about what is best. Following educators' lead and working with their child at home on what the educator determines is most important was considered to be the Goldilocks just right involvement. What are characteristics of good partnerships you've had versus less effective partnerships was the interviewer's question. Fortunately, I have never really had bad situations. Most of the parents I have been really supportive. In what ways were they good? Whatever modifications I came up with, they are very willing to help. Well, how do we redefine just right involvement? In some of the work that Rudd and I have done, and Mickey, you alluded to using our family textbook, this is the 7th edition that will be coming out momentarily. We focus on principles of partnership: communication, respect, equality, competence, advocacy, commitment, and trust. And we focus on the fact that it takes these principles of how we come together as parents and professionals for partnerships according to the vision of IDEA to come to pass. A lot of what we must do is to think about how we treat parents. One of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou is, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And Rudd, you and I can remember teachers over the years that really made us feel as joint partners, and teachers that moved us to the side. And when teachers moved us to the side, it was some of our most difficult times in terms of Jay being able to be successful in his setting and in his life. I read a very recent study that's just come out that looked at the stress of parents who are involved in family-school partnerships. And this study found that Mothers with very positive family school partnerships reported significantly less stress. Mothers who were engaged in fewer advocacy activities reported significantly less stress. Interestingly, only mothers with excellent partnerships had less stress. If they had average partnerships or above average partnerships, that did not lead to less stress, only excellent partnerships. And mothers with poor or adequate partnerships still experience very high stress. It is so easy to send stress into the family system rather than hopefulness and rather than a sense of competence by what the quality of that partnership is. Rudd and I have been doing a lot of thinking about what we really feel is missing in the work that we've done and in so much that happens in professional family partnerships or lack of partnerships in the Goldilocks way. And one of the things that we increasingly are coming to is the need in our professional development for much more emphasis on empathy, on standing in parents' shoes and seeing things from their perspective, of having a deep understanding of parents' feelings and actions. We spend so little time on really trying to know what it feels like and what it is like for that parent. And the second thing, to focus much more on compassion, of compassion being tuned into others' needs. Compassion is having the empathy, but it goes beyond empathy, and it focuses on a desire to alleviate the stress and the needs of families. Rudd and I had a wonderful conversation this morning with Susan Fowler and her very impressive staff about the needs of families, especially in urban areas in the most frightening and violent-ridden neighborhoods. And this team showed such empathy and compassion for these families and how we're letting them down by the policies that we have, by our fear of working with them, and by our lack of flexibility of thinking, how can we still maintain our safety and at the same time meet their needs? That was a very affirming conversation, Susan. And then dignity. Doesn't it all come back to dignity? Treating others with respect and esteem. If we treat people, especially people with the most intensive support needs, with dignity, and we treat their families with dignity, we will find solutions. I want to show you a clip from the memorial service of our beloved son, Jay, who died very unexpectedly 5.5 years ago at the age of 42. And at that time, as Mickey said, Jay had a very enviable life after some really tough years, some tough, painful years for him and for us, when his exclusion and when his failure in the adult system was so painful. But we were able, fortunately, through lots of hard work and lots of help from to come back out of the black hole and into a wonderful life. And this is Mike Waymeyer, one of our respected colleagues and the person who will take our place at the Beach Center as the next director. This is Mike sharing, this is an excerpt of part of the eulogy of Mike at Jay's services. Listen for what, from Mike's perspective, is the essence of what made the difference in Jay's life. Think about that. Be in the dignity business. And think about Jay's life, when Rudd and I married, Jay is Rudd's biological son from a previous marriage. He was 7 years old. He came home to live with us in Chapel Hill. He had very little language, but he learned the 2 words that truly make a difference in Chapel Hill. As the Gallagher boys know who went to UNC, he learned the 2 words, "Go Tar Heels." And that bought him great acceptance. We moved to Kansas. He had some good years and some not so good years. But the worst of the worst was when he transitioned out of the public school and into the adult services in our community that was highly segregated, sheltered workshop, group home of 8 people living together, special bus, the little buses that only people with disabilities ride. Jay didn't have that. Well, Rudd and I knew that it wasn't what he needed, and it was not the path to dignity, but it was the only thing available. And we'd started almost every program he had ever been in, and we didn't want to start another program. We had 2 more than full-time jobs, 2 other children, limited energy to take on a system. But Jay went into that program, and just as he effectively learned Go Tar Heels, he effectively learned how to advocate for himself in that program. He chose one person to hit and choke every time he saw him, and that person was the son of a state legislator. So by the time Jay was 21 years old, he was expelled from the only adult program in our community. And we look back and say, it was a friend of ours, a friend from Chapel Hill, Jim Chancellor Ronnie, said to us, "Ann and Rudd, no matter how far down the wrong road you go, if it's the wrong road, turn around." And we were on a road that did not lead to dignity and was not characterized by empathy and compassion. And we turned around. Never did we think that part of Jay's future would be the doors would be opened by a college fraternity. But we hired a guy from the university to take Jay to exercise because he didn't have a job and he didn't have anything else to do, and we thought he could go to the health club. And as luck in the universe would have it, this guy was the educational advisor at one of the fraternities on campus. He would take Jay to the fraternity house. Music was always playing. Jay loved music. The movie, what's the movie, Rudd? Rain Man was popular then. Probably many of you have seen Rain Man. All these guys wanted to be Tom Cruise. It was kind of in to have a person with a disability. And what was so great is that we learned that what you get kicked out of programs for people with disabilities for, they do at fraternity parties every Saturday night. A little hitting, a little choking. That was not unusual. You could make noises from different parts of your body, and that was okay. Rudd captures many of these stories in his book, The Exceptional Life of Jay Turnbull, Disability and Dignity in America, 1967 to 2009. And I'll have to say, Rudd was the greatest father that any person with a disability could ever have had. And Rudd's book is a real history of IDEA's critical outcomes of equal opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. And so when Mike Waymeyer talked about being in the dignity business, this was a young man who had been kicked out of adult services who ended up working at the University of Kansas for 22 years and having his own home and having so many friends in the community. And it came from the principles of partnership, from empathy, compassion, and dignity. Now, a real antique, a book that Rudd and I put out many years ago, had a chapter co-authored by Jim and Ronnie. And they talked about being parents and raising children and what it was like from a parent point of view as contrasted to a professional point of view. This quote, Ronnie, really struck me. One of the disturbing aspects of dealing with the professionals is that when one is playing the role of parent, one is automatically stripped of any knowledge or expertise that one might otherwise possess. Even simple parent observations are suspect because of the possibility of bias. And I thought, any professional who stripped the Gallaghers of their expertise must have been one audacious professional. I can't imagine two more competent, loving parents. And if that happens to parents such as the Gallaghers and to the Turnbulls and to Susan, what happens to the families who are living in the most challenged environment that Susan and her staff are concerned about? Families who don't have multiple degrees and enough money to buy service if they need to, and credibility and contacts. That's where we have to really take a profound responsibility to be advocates. Well, Paul, you were saying you were not sure what Sam would say, but I want to end with just being audacious myself and being sure of what Jim and Sam would say. So Jim would say to us, be in the empathy, compassion, and dignity business. And I think Sam would say the same thing. Be in the empathy, compassion, and dignity business. And may we use the wisdom of these two giants and the spirits of theirs that are still alive and among us and looking on us today to foster opportunities for all people with disabilities to have the enviable life that they want to live, and ultimately for their parents to be respected partners on the team with just right involvement, redefined to be parents who bring their all to the table in terms of making joint decisions. Thank you for this opportunity.